Media is a terrifyingly powerful thing. It can affect us in ways that we can't even comprehend, whether it be through fear, sadness, joy, empathy. It can make us feel the lowest of the lows and the highest of the highs. When a child hears a ghost story for the first time, or sees something that they probably shouldn't, the go-to response from adults is, "Don't worry, it's not real, it's only a story." That may calm them down and eventually they'll forget about it, but that statement doesn't really make sense. Fictional stories can affect us. Whether they're real or not doesn't really matter. The difference here is that the first time a child sees, say, Freddy Krueger on the front of a DVD cover, all they want is some reassurance that he isn't going to come and get them. As you grow older, your reaction to horror shifts. You know Pyramid Head isn't real, you know that Freddy Krueger isn't real, but these things can still scare you. But Silent Hill 2 and Nightmare on Elm Street don't pretend to be real. But what if they did? Halloween night, 1992. Michael Parkinson appears on the BBC to tell everybody that they're about to witness the first televised ghost hunt in history. The catch? It's all fake. Ghostwatch is one of the most important events in British television history from every angle. Its creation, airing, and subsequent backlash led to it being swept under the rug by the BBC for decades, despite it bringing in over 11 million viewers, 30,000 complaints, and resulting in so many phone-ins that the BBC switchboard jammed. Brainchild of writer Stephen Volk and director Leslie Manning, the one-off show stemmed from an idea for a 6-episode series, and eventually aired as part of the anthology series Screen 1. When I first heard of Ghostwatch a few years back, I was blown away with how genius it was. Take a number of well-known TV personalities, give them an obviously fictional storyline to follow, but sell it completely straight. But you already know all that. Ghostwatch is infamous, and there are already tons of people talking about what happened on the show, the backlash, both the hilarious and the horrific, but there's no point in me repeating all that. Instead, I want to talk about what Ghostwatch symbolized, how it predicted the landscape of television going into the 21st century, and why we'll never get a show quite as brilliant as it ever again. If, however, you've never seen Ghostwatch in its entirety, I'll give you a quick recap here, although I highly recommend watching the show for yourself.
The program you're about to watch is a unique live investigation of the supernatural. It contains...
As I mentioned earlier, Ghostwatch presented itself as a live paranormal investigation, and the seeds of its deception are placed right in the beginning. On walks Parky, one of the most beloved and well-known presenters in British television history, and he's not playing a character. He's playing himself. Next we see Mike Smith and Sarah Green, followed by cheeky Red Dwarf star Craig Charles, all of whom are presented as themselves. However, amongst them are fictional characters, such as paranormal investigator Dr. Lynn Pascoe. The show throws just enough reality at the viewers to have them questioning just how real it really is. The basic structure sees Sarah Green and her team in a supposedly haunted house in Northolt that Dr. Pascoe has been investigating for some time. Craig Charles is outside the house talking to some locals and neighbours, while Parkinson, Pascoe, and Smith are in the studio reacting to and discussing events from within the house. The ghost, nicknamed Mr. Pipes due to the central heating being blamed for spooky noises at night, is suspected of being a vicious poltergeist, who not only harms the two daughters in the house, but also speaks through one of them.
If you can grunt, can you speak?
Parky mentions that there's a phone number for people to call in if they have any paranormal stories that they wish to share with the nation. As the show goes on, more and more paranormal events begin occurring in the house. Callers come on the air to tell our hosts that they spotted something standing in the background in certain scenes, until eventually, everything falls apart. By the end of the show, callers from all over the country are claiming paranormal events are occurring thanks to the show, with the idea being that Ghostwatch has created a mass seance around Britain. The show ends with the studio being evacuated, and Parkinson left alone, now possessed by the ghost of Mr. Pipes. Describing Ghostwatch like this doesn't really do the show justice, because it makes it very clear that it's a fictional tale. Sarah Green wasn't dragged into a basement, the BBC studio didn't start collapsing, and Parkinson most certainly wasn't possessed by a ghost live on television. But over the course of an hour and a half, the show placed enough doubt in viewers' minds that they could end it with something as ridiculous as Parkinson singing Fee Fi Fo Fum, and still have many people questioning whether it was real or fake. There are many reasons why Ghostwatch worked, and I think they fall pretty neatly into two categories: when it was released, and how it was presented. In 1992, there were only a handful of channels on British television, with the BBC being particularly important, home of Top of the Pops, EastEnders, Only Fools and Horses, comedies, drama, and everything in between. People trusted the BBC. On top of this, almost 30 years ago, knowledge of things like special effects and how the television industry worked weren't exactly public knowledge. In the words of Stephen Volk, it was designed to be piped into your home when you're least suspecting it, expecting a kind of live TV show, but in fact it's obviously something else, masquerading as a live TV show. Then you've got the presentation. The established faces that the audience could trust are only more believable when you discover that Parkinson wasn't operating on a script for most of the show, and was instead given the freedom to react and improvise based on the images in front of him. The story of the home itself in the show also had very clear parallels to the story of the Enfield poltergeist, a story which took British tabloids by storm in the late 70s. There were moments designed to completely frustrate the audience and encourage them to call in repeatedly. In one of the most genius moments, Dr. Pascoe shows a clip of the children's bedroom during a particularly dangerous night. About 10 minutes later, a fictional caller points out a shadowy figure in the clip. However, when Pascoe and Parkinson view the clip, they fail to see it. The truth is, there was no ghost in the first clip, but the second time they showed it, there's a clear view of Mr. Pipes. And they drew around, and we were going, "No, you've missed the head. Ring the number again." Volk describes the landscape of television at the time, and how not only was it the early stages of reality TV, but also how documentary and fiction began crossing over. So-called documentaries were using staged actors and recreating accidents, while fictional programs were using documentary-style filmmaking techniques. Their intention was to completely dissolve these walls that were slowly being chipped away by other programs to create a commentary on trust and the role television had at the time. When writing the story, Volk had to completely disregard the screenwriting rules in order to sell the believability of it all. Everything from what cameras were used, how the actors spoke, to sound design and the choice to not have music, everything served the purpose of making sure the presentation was as believable as possible. Between an audience who were woefully unprepared for a fictional story that was presenting itself as fact, and a story which rooted itself in both the reality of its presenters and similar stories of the supernatural that were culturally relevant at the time, it was a perfect storm. And what a storm it was.
But I also think that you betrayed the trust that the audience has within the BBC.
Within 5 minutes, nothing had happened. He reacted instantly.
You wanted everyone to believe it was a live programme
Yes.
going out, especially with the number used for Crime Watch.
Well, I thought it was one sick joke, the way that it was based around children, the way that the children were involved in the actual story. Why did you have to bring the children into it?
People had their own video recorders and their own video cameras, and we thought they were completely literate in those things, and had absolutely no idea that people would carry on believing this was going out for real. The BBC were not happy. Tabloid press across the country lambasted the programme, calling it a hoax, and the show was placed under investigation. Producers Ruth Baumgarten and Richard Broke appeared on Bite Back, and were attacked by members of the public who felt they had been duped by the program. Baumgarten herself had received letters telling her that she had opened the door to the realm of evil, and internally in the BBC, things weren't much better. Despite talk of a BAFTA nomination, the BBC were trying to distance themselves as much as possible from the show, and it was successfully swept under the rug for over a decade. Ghostwatch was banned from being re-aired, and the show went underground. Recordings and tapes were passed around to people who had missed out on the fateful night, and it wasn't given a home video release until 2002. Nowadays, Ghostwatch is looked back on as a seminal moment in television history, but it didn't happen all at once. While Ghostwatch lay waiting in the shadows, television drastically changed. Reality TV shows like Big Brother began airing. Truth and integrity gave way to manufactured drama and fiction. Most Haunted and shows of its ilk appeared, hilariously feeling less believable than Ghostwatch, yet Yvette Fielding was never demanded to apologize to the country for giving them sleepless nights. Media literacy increased, people became more savvy, and when it came to re-releasing and talking about Ghostwatch, people were finally able to come forward and talk about it in a good light. Now, this is not to say that everyone hated Ghostwatch. Much of the response was fueled by tabloid reporting, which didn't truly represent the thoughts of the public. The sad truth about the backlash to Ghostwatch was that it became a moral outrage, rather than a groundbreaking piece of television. Reading reactions at the time, one word comes up more than any, and that's trust. The viewing public trusted the BBC, and breaking that trust made them furious. Television was the moral center of the household. It provided news, entertainment, music, everything a family could want. And for decades leading up to the 90s, people believed and trusted in it. The piece, as a piece of drama, was all about who do you trust? Do you trust the information you're being given? Is that person really an expert? Are they bullshitting you? I was kind of trying to, in drama, ask those kinds of questions, and challenge people to kind of not just gobble up what they're watching. Ghostwatch was a response to and a prediction of the future of television. As a medium, television, and particularly the BBC, had a huge power over the public, and Volk and the rest of the staff on Ghostwatch recognized this power. The show was never meant to completely fool the public. It was only meant to momentarily confuse them into questioning how real it really was. But really, I thought people would start watching it, and within 5 minutes they see Parkinson, they may or may not think it's real. And then they'd kind of go, oh, I see, this is what they're doing. And they'd kind of stay with it and enjoy it for the kind of conceit of it. That's honestly what I thought would happen. I think this is why the show ramps up in the way that it does. From a horror standpoint, it's excellently paced, with the first half being surprisingly mundane and entertaining. Craig Charles is pulling pranks on Sarah Green, Parkinson is in quite a jovial mood, and while small hints are being set up for the second half, nothing too horrifying happens. By luring in the audience, the second half hits even harder, when all hell truly breaks loose. Parky begins cutting off callers, telling people to turn off their television sets if they're frightened, and suddenly, all of that build-up pays off. As I said earlier, the second half of this piece is so ridiculous when read in a vacuum that it seems insane that anyone could believe that it was real. But I don't want to go too academic and ignore the fact that Ghostwatch is a wonderfully terrifying work. Even now, knowing what we do about special effects, and knowing that it can't possibly be real, it's still scary. Because at its core, it's an excellent ghost story. Nowadays, ghost stories have gone out of vogue. With modern technology and skeptics, stories like the Enfield haunting don't really happen anymore. And when they do, they're based off videos of kitchens being smashed up by fishing wire and people off camera banging walls. This isn't to say that these classic ghost stories are any more believable, but back then, people's word meant a lot more. A picture of a girl jumping off a bed becomes a picture of a girl being thrown from her bed when told by paranormal investigators. I love classic ghost stories. I still watch episodes of Most Haunted every now and then to fulfill that child in me that still wants to believe in ghosts lurking around abandoned mansions in the countryside. Ghostwatch existed in a transitional period, after the heyday of paranormal investigation and before the skeptical age where people are a bit more savvy, much like television. This is why we'll never get a program like Ghostwatch ever again. It represents both a time when television was the dominant medium and when people were a little more gullible. When it first aired, the only ghost haunting Northolt was Mr. Pipes. But now, with almost 30 years of context, there's something else. The ghost of an era when television was king. In the modern era, we've seen similar things appear on the internet. I don't think it's completely unfair to compare the rise of internet horror idols like Slenderman to Ghostwatch. Both used their medium to convince people something was real when it wasn't, but where the difference lies is in its intent. Ghostwatch never intended to pass itself off as entirely real. By the halfway point, Volk and the rest of the team assumed that viewers would catch on to the deception and appreciate it for what it is, fiction. So while tabloid rags called it a hoax, the real audience were inspired. Ghostwatch inspired a generation of creators to branch out, explore different aspects of your chosen medium. Don't just do what's comfortable or expected. While these people have gone on to write, direct, and create art in many forms, none of them will ever truly make Ghostwatch again. Because, once that seance began, the world changed forever.